I think this is one of the greatest things of the agenda in this conference, or the programming in this conference, is the very long coffee breaks, so that we can really get to talk to each other, get to know each other, and for those of us who are physical. Thank you for joining back. We're here on the closing panel together with too sunny Gordon McKenna, who's the standards manager in Collections Trust. You might know him if you know Spectrum, among other things. We also have maybe Manvi, Seth online. We're waiting for her, so we cross fingers that she's able to. We've had some technical difficulties, so we cross fingers that she's able to join online. And we have back with us Aparna Tandon, who's the senior program leader at ICCROM, dealing with the first aid and resilience of cultural heritage in times of crisis, that we heard our third keynote today. And myself, what are we doing today? So we have our closing panel. I wanted to just read the first line of the program. What is this CIDOC 2021 about? It's about symbiosis of tradition and digital technology. Technology presents various opportunities, but also raises obstacles. It requires balancing traditions and innovation, and it requires the capacity to make the right decisions and to implement them. Now, this is what we have heard throughout the conference, but also very much so in this last day. And so I wanted to ask our it's difficult to say table, but we imagine here a table, and we see actually Aparna twice. But yes, I would like to ask our panelists to reflect. Maybe I'll give you the word, Gordon, to reflect on what have we heard on this conference. You follow quite not everything, because we have parallel sessions and so. But what do you take from this conference in terms of this sort of balancing of tradition and technology?
Well, I mean, to start with, it's a sort of a false dichotomy, I think. I mean, at the moment, I'm the cool high technologist wearing my nice sunglasses, but when I take this off, I'm the bog standard archaeologist who was stuck in a field in Nottinghamshire in the 1970s. The organisation that I work for, I don't know if anybody was in the room who attended our session, has been around since the 1970s and maybe even the 60s, if you want to include the sort of prehistory. What we try to do is to treat people like individuals and treat people not as pieces of technology or acting like pieces of technology, but we have to live with the modern world. I mean, when I started with what was the MDA, the first computer that we had was about the size of a fridge freezer, ran off half-inch tape, I think it was, and took overnight to do something that would have today would take probably milliseconds. So there have been great changes. So I'm talking about 1991, so not that long ago. One of the things that we've been doing recently is look at objects that are not purely physical. We've come up with a concept of a digital collection object rather than a physical one. So we're talking about maybe software, maybe born digital art, born digital photographs. And we've been looking at how they should be treated differently. And I think this conference has sort of gone some way to looking at that sort of idea. One thing I thought I would sort of start with a question to the audience, and you're going to be pictured hopefully. Put your hand up if this is the first CIDOC conference that you've been to.
Physical. The first physical conference.
So, yeah, I would say a good 20%, would you say?
Yes.
So
Maybe
quite a
more.
lot of people. So
Now, could I please have a hands up, and those with the app, please help me look. How many of those have been here for the first digital? Can somebody look in the app? Please share. Yes, Aparna. Aha.
First time.
Yes, digital. Yeah.
So do you have any idea of the figures for that one?
I know from the other panel there were 2 people for the first time coming back for their second time, and the first timers were probably 4. Yeah.
So to go back to the physical people, will one of you volunteer to give your impressions of being at a physical conference, probably for the first time, or even for the first time in the last 3 years? So does anybody want to volunteer to say something? Or I will...
Well, I would like to start by, maybe saying somebody mentioned this has been a life-changing experience. Can we hear from you on this, please? Can you please share the mic on the second row?
If you're very good, I'll lend you my sunglasses. No.
Yes, she's turning on the mic. Yeah.
So yes, I thought this was a private conversation, but whatever. So yeah, I was telling Trilce earlier that this was an overwhelming experience for me in many levels, and actually the levels have sub-levels, because I've heard so many things that were either interesting for me personally or for the team that I'm working with. But there were also people that I've met. I mean, I can't believe how friendly you all are and how open. I mean, I felt so comfortable around you. So yeah, well, in general, I'm so grateful to be here, and thank you very much for giving me the chance to be here. That's it.
Well, thank you for joining. Yes. Somebody else would like to share their thoughts on this physical meeting? Is for some of us, maybe our first physical meeting after being locked at home for some time? Okay, so we'll come back to the questions. Be prepared. So maybe I'll read another line here. Technology has moved from being a challenge to museums to becoming a facilitator and eventually an integral part of the museum experience. Emerging technologies allow and compel us to adopt new ways of working, but we do so within the framework of traditional planning methods like strategies and roadmaps. How can we best exploit both of these areas and reap the benefits of the symbiosis? So again, new technologies with new possibilities and traditional ways of working. Aparna, maybe can I ask you, you share some views on perhaps some of these challenges of having new technologies and perhaps not institutions, but maybe supra-institutions of groups of people that perhaps have traditional ways of working not always able to move or translate into the new technology?
I feel that I think the COVID has brought in a change, and I think people are suddenly, even those who were reluctant earlier, we had to embrace this world of technology and look how fast all around us transition has happened. I have been leading a capacity development program at ICCROM, which was sound and image archiving, audiovisual archiving, and now on sustaining digital heritage. And we have just finished conducting a huge survey. And what we have found is not so much as that people do not want to in the world of museums or heritage sector, people would like to embrace technology. It's just that there is a gap of not being able to talk to the information technology sector, or not being able to find right size solutions for your own institution if you are a startup. And it's like the costs, the inability to talk to the tech sector, and as well as uh, you know a kind of a fear of leaving the familiar territory is what is holding people back, if at all it is holding people back. But the push is so great that that even that will give away. So that's our experience.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that survey? What else did you, what other insights do you get from this survey? To whom was this distributed, and maybe what other questions did you include in the survey?
Well, this was more than a survey. It was I'm sorry I said survey. It's more of a stakeholder conversation where we spoke with various developers, educators, also creators of digital content, as well as donors, funders who are funding digitization projects in museums or within the cultural heritage sector. And we also spoke with developers who are looking at creative reuse or bringing out new range of products for museums and archives, libraries, the GLAM sector, so to speak. And so this was more of a conversation where we interviewed a range of people from in all parts of the world. And it's this conversation I'm talking back to. And there is a report which is now available online, and I can, as we progress in this conversation, I can look for it and send the link in chat.
Yeah, super. Thank you. I'm sure we will be interested to look at the report results.
Yeah, can I if we're talking about surveys, at the end of last year, beginning of this year, Collections Trust was hired by something called Towards a National Collection, which is looking at creating a national collection in the UK. And we asked various sort of technical questions of various museums. So it was 260 of the most important organisations as museums, libraries and archives. So it wasn't just museums. And we asked questions like, do you have an API? Mm-hmm. And maybe not unsurprisingly, virtually nobody had one. Mm-hmm. Do you have persistent identifiers? That was even worse. So it's interesting that fairly basic things are still not being done in the sector. However, on a good note, I think digital isn't different. I think you need to be aware that though it sounds like the sunglassed technologists know better, I've tended to find that that's not be the case, particularly when they're interacting with the type of information that we deal with, the complexities, the ambiguities, and so on. So if one piece of advice I would suggest that you take away is don't be afraid of the technologists. You probably know more about the information than they do.
Yeah, this is something that Hebo Paji from the Archeovision was presenting on how new technology was not always so complicated, it seemed to him, but somehow it was difficult to adopt in the work process because institutions are used, staff in institutions are used to working in a particular way. And this brings me to the whole point, institutions are not a blob, but it's people, they're individuals, and that's what we've been talking about, building these relationships among individuals. I would like to ask the last row to share their views. Ali, perhaps. You guys represent some of the younger generation of documentalists who are joining us here, and we always have the wish that the younger generations are not fearful of digital technologies and are able to bridge this gap. Can you share a little bit about how do you feel in your work processes if technology is enabling you, if you feel is it your colleagues that are not able to embrace, or are there other challenges for embracing new technologies in your daily work? You guys would like to share? I put you on the spot. I warned you. Thank you.
As per our conversation, that one of my dreams in Egypt that technology will have a vital role in documentation in museum, because until now we haven't a standard documentation for all museum and collection storage in Egypt, and we are now working to have Egypt documentation project at the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, and I hope that we can have open sources and open access for all collection in Egypt, and also for the Egyptian collection around the world. You know that the Egyptian collection is everywhere around the world. For me, that's my dream, as I mentioned before.
Yeah, wonderful, and technology can very much support this.
Yeah. For I will. I have something to share in my city, Mansoura. In 2030, a car bombed Mansoura security building. It was the terrorism bomb. It destroyed the most old part of my city. We have initiative Save Mansoura, and we open call for all Mansoura citizens to participate by any documentation for this building, and any pictures or anything for private collection to support us with it, to deliver it to the government to help restoration of the building. And thanks God the restoration is going now and the building is reviving. And thanks to technology, actually.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm sorry, I was distracted, but I heard that Manvi is able to join us, and so there she is. Wonderful. Welcome, Manvi.
Hi, Trilce, but I can't hear you. Yeah, hi.
You can see us, yes? Now you can?
No, I can see you and hear you, everything.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Ali, and I really hope that your dream comes true, supporting this open accessibility of collections across Egypt. And you were mentioning the ideal of having one system, one national system, and so I would like to ask one of the local members who's familiar with the system, MUIS system in Estonia, and of course I know one person who knows it very well, but perhaps there's others who would like to share their views about if Egypt is to share, is to sort of learn from Estonians one system, what sort of tips could you give on how to start and maybe, how to go about this dream of Ali to come true? Oh, is the microphone on?
Not on.
Trilce,
Yes. What?
Did now.
Oh, now you
Yes.
can hear me.
Yes, Trin, thank you.
So hi, so my name is Triin. I'm just going to mention I'm also one of the organizers of this conference, and I work at the National Heritage Board as the Director of Development of the Museum Information System. So, so right now, obviously, we're developing the new version of our National Museum information system, but we've actually already had one since I think 1998. That's true. It was called differently, but it was a local system which was used in every museum separately. It wasn't a web-based system, but already since 2008 we've had a web-based system which is the same for all the museums that have joined the system. And right now, we have 59 museums in Estonia who have joined the system. And according to the statistics, we have 175 museums in Estonia in total. So you can imagine how many museums are using the same system. So there's lots of activities they're doing there. For instance, it's you can acquire objects. We describe the objects in the system. We upload digital objects. So pictures, audio files, video files, etc. And these are all accessible through the public portal. So at the moment, we have almost 4 million objects that have been uploaded, that have been described. 4 million objects that have been added to the online collection. But about 2 million have been described, and about 2 million also where digital objects have been added. So, obviously this makes our collections in Estonia more accessible, and it makes the work for the museums much easier, because the museums which use the system, they can also communicate with each other through the system. And also other activities which I didn't mention again is, for instance, borrowing, loaning out objects, and you would get data back. For instance, if you have borrowed an object to another museum, then they can enter data about the descriptions, and if the for instance the object has been damaged. For instance, during transport, then you would get that information back. So basically, you get a very good idea where your collection is at any point, at any time. And obviously we do encourage museums to join the system, because I think according to the statistics, only about 25% of all the collections in Estonia are being exhibited. So it is, through the digital collection we can, show our collections more that is truly is possible in the physical form. But I mean, I could go on forever, but Ali, you can definitely come and speak to me later. Thank you.
Super, thank you very much. So we hear that a dream in Egypt that I'm sure many other countries are hoping for, and here's some example in Estonia. So please, let's make some connections to share the knowledge. I would like to welcome Manvi and perhaps already start with a question for you. So the whole conference of CIDOC has been about the symbiosis between tradition and maybe in the way of working, in our collections, in our views and many things, and also the future, and including. But we also have some traditional technology as well. But on the digital side, chair the Asia panel, which was full of incredible examples on how many museums across Asia continent are working with digital documentation of their collections. Can you perhaps, for those, many of us were not there, well, I was there, but for those who were not there, perhaps you can share a little bit on what will be the characteristic of digital documentation across Asian. I know this is a difficult question because Asian is huge, but across the panelists who participated.
Thank you, Trilce. And I get the opportunity to share the brief of and the crux of the Asia panel. We started this panel in 2020, and 11 countries had participated at that time. Sorry, 11 participants from 8 countries. And this year, again, 10 participants from 8 countries, and we got a very diverse range of documentation practices being carried on in museums. And the presentations were about documentation of built heritage, documentation of museum objects, the experiments they are doing, the challenges they are facing, but also documentation of intangible cultural heritage. And what really came out was, yes, there is an increased use of digital technology in documentation, and each country, each region is coming up with its own strategies, its own case studies and examples. At the same time, there is a lot of community participation which is happening. So in the whole documentation process also, they are considering community as a participant now, not just as a source, but how to do this documentation. And this is what we saw. It was very encouraging actually to see this. This actually leads to the future, and where digital and technology and tradition go hand in hand, not just in terms of the product, which is the culture, but also the process of how we do it and how we carry it forward.
And you are such an active member of Instagram. You hold lectures there and you have many speakers and so on. Do you think this is one of the future platforms to share knowledge and perhaps best practice about documentation across museum and museum experts to be? Oh no. I think Manvi has frozen.
Yeah.
Yes, Aparna?
If I may, yes, I was just this conversation as you were talking about, networked collections and systems in which collections can be seen and accessed from other places. I think there is one very vital aspect about digital technologies that we must not forget. When we are thinking of bringing in digital technologies, we should also think about what is the value that we are creating. After all, heritage is an experience. And bringing on a digital dimension it's not just data that we are bringing to people. It's not just stream that is coming, but it has a value. And what service does it provide for people? What do people do with heritage? That should be our preoccupation. And what do people do with data? And how do they use it to negotiate their present situation, to build a future? How can we create sustainable development or promote sustainable development through digital technologies, and bring decision makers, end users, content creators all together? And I think that is very important. So having a service mindset for the end users, I think, is the key to really optimizing the use of digital technologies, and also showing to decision makers that this is a value added, this adds value to the work that GLAM sector is doing. And I think that these are some of the key areas that we should focus on.
Yeah, thank you, Aparna. I believe very much so that the value of documentation is, or value creation of the, let's say, the value added of documentation is really when you get to use all of the work done, behind the scenes. And so, welcome, Manvi. I'm so glad you're back, because then I can ask you a follow-up question. Yes. Oh no.
Again.
She was. Yes, there she is. Yes. So let's try one more question. So in this conference, we're balancing all these things: technology, tradition, connections, physical, and so on. Could you say something about this balance between the behind-the-scenes hard work documentation and the view of the visitor, of the view of the user? How do you balance this, Manvi?
So, Trilce, you're asking me to talk about the particular work we are doing, but we are also trying. So, I'll give you two views. One is through the things which we are doing in terms of intangible cultural heritage, and another is when we are trying to study how visitors get affected by the documentation in a manner that it is done, so behind. In the intangible cultural heritage document.
Oh, I feel this is going to be a little bit of a challenge. Technology? Yes. Yes, we lost her again. Okay, so let's get us back to the round table we have here, and let me then reposition my question. So we keep trying to put these opposites, technology and tradition. Gordon said, well, they might not be opposites, and also this apparent opposite of back-end documentation and front-end access. That might also not be opposites. There might be also ways in which people, as they interact with collections or as they interact with our data, with our knowledge, they can contribute to this documentation. This is something we've discussed as well. Yeah. Gordon, do you have some experience with this?
Yes, I mean, at the moment, what we're trying to do with Spectrum, particularly the cataloguing procedure, is to make it more amenable to open cataloguing, in the sense of it's not just the organisation that's doing the gathering of information, it's also the audience, the users, the stakeholders who have at least a voice, and sometimes a major voice in this. So one of the questions I want to ask the members of the audience, put your hand up if you have worked in your organisation in an open cataloguing thing, so working with users to gather information about your collection. So can you put your hand up? So nobody? Interesting. Would somebody like to volunteer to say why they haven't done that? Is there a reason? Go on then.
Goran, so we have a microphone coming up on the second row.
I can share just a little.
Let's see, your mic is not on yet?
It is?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I can share one project where I cooperate with Croatian Sports Museums. And it is started. So, in fact, we didn't start it yet, but we'll start really soon. So there are huge collection of negatives, photographs, more than 100,000, and end users. That would be retired members of Croatian Journal Association. There would be annotated those photographs, and that they would be recording some stories and oral histories. So now we setting up the process and setting up some problems of inclusion of keywords, or how those keywords, user generated keywords, would be evaluated. Should the museum people said no, this is not a good keyword or something like this. So there are some not problems but challenges.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this experience. I'd like to then, we heard on our speakers earlier today, like the Sucho project, they're involving the crowd to support in other parts. So not only the documentation of the collection, also selection, prioritization. And on the program, it says, yes, CIDOC has always advanced the use of standards and tools, and this will be discussed in the conference, but sometimes it's time to renew them. And I know that we have a member in the audience who has some experience in the crowdsourcing of tools for creating the systems to document our collections. Carolina, can I ask you perhaps to maybe mention about what is this community that is working together to develop a software system to support the work of museums documenting at low costs?
Hi. I'm working in a laboratory in Brazil, São Paulo, and they are developing the Tinacan, which is an open source software that it's a kind of a plugin of the WordPress. And in the WordPress, you can create a website for museums with a how can I say, in a database with large databases, and you can upload images and what else, documentation and so on. So I think most of the museums in Brazil has already how can I say, they already have the Tinacan version, and anybody can also download it and do it by yourself. And we also have tutorials, and we can teach people how to make their own website.
And can you give a sense on how many contributors that are working on this system at this moment? What is the size of the crowd?
I think it's more than 50, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. It's a group of, it's interesting, no? How this, what I wanted to say is generally you have these bottom-up projects that are trying to solve the need of a system, that responds to whatever the institutions need, but somehow in the process of bottom-up, you do need some form of housing or some form of sustainability. And this you find, again, often in universities. Sucho is headed by, Stefan, was it his name? He's presenting right from Andreas. Andreas, he's at the university, and Tinacan project is also housed at the university. And there's a number of these projects that are housed in universities because universities appear to be one of the long-lasting knowledge-sharing and knowledge-producing institutions that, along with museums, they seem to sort of hold this sustainability in the knowledge-sharing. How do you have experience working with universities in this process between, the GLAMs or museums, universities in advancing sustainably?
Not directly myself, but in the UK, certainly, museums are part of the community, not something over there. One of the other things that I think is important, certainly in an international context, is to have standards and tools and training in the language of the country that you're working with. But to do that, the people creating standards need to be open to do that, and also not to ask for any fees to do that. So, for example, Spectrum is available for free for non-commercial use throughout the world, but not just in English. It's available in French, Spanish, Polish, and Arabic even. I just wanted to give the floor to Alexander about his experience of why it's important to have Spectrum in Portuguese. And your experiences of doing the translation.
No. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's okay. So just to the importance of Spectrum, it was for many cases in Portugal and in Brazil and in some other countries. It worked as for some museums as a first time that they have an organized way of doing things like they previously do in a very chaotic way and not organized way. It was also a thing that helped us to a standard that helped us to think about our processes in Portugal, in Brazil, in some specific cases of museums that are using Spectrum there for many specific issues, some more advanced like loans and things like that, but some of them for the specificities of cataloging or simple and basic inventory of our things. And I guess that the first training that we have at Spectrum in Brazil and in Portugal came out with people that have a lot of questions about things like their cataloging systems and the software that they will or they need to use. But I guess that we managed to, or at least we try to explain them that software is yes, is important, but it's not the first thing that they need to care. If the process of documentation, for instance, in the case of the National History Museum in Brazil, the Museu Nacional, that completely goes to the ground by a fire, if they had made some prior questions about the safety of the data and where their data was, maybe a lot of things that they have lost there shouldn't have been lost. So Spectrum, and not only Spectrum, of course, but Spectrum is a way to start thinking about that things. But I know that in Brazil they are worried about these things. Also in Portugal we are, but in a slow pace. We must hurry up, and I hope that the disgrace in some other countries can help us to be more aware of these particular things around museum documentation and heritage documentation.
But do you think it's important to be able to have the standard in Portuguese rather than just in English? Yes. Why?
That was when I started to work on museum documentation, and I'm not a well-trained person in English. It's not my first language. I can better speak Portuguese and Spanish. They are close to me, but it was. I realized that it was very important to have that in Portuguese because some of the concepts that you have in Spectrum translated directly, or for someone that don't know the exact definitions of the terms in English, could be quite difficult to understand. So the translation, the first translation that we have carried out in Portugal, started to help us to discuss some of that specific issues. And when we done it and published it in Brazil, it was a very wide eye-opening for the community of museum documentalists in Brazil, not only for the museum people, but also for archives and libraries as well. Because it's in our language, and we have a lot of we were careful when we translated Spectrum and other. For instance, we translated as well the CIDOC information categories, and also our other CIDOC documents, important documents, and they help us a lot in both the countries to pass the message.
I mean, as part of your work as the editor of the website, we're constantly trying to get the material on the website available, at least in the official languages of ICCROM. But I think we should be open to, Portuguese isn't an official language, but we should be able to offer that. So would you want the community in CIDOC to be open to translate all the material into different languages?
Oh, it will be great. We need it. We don't have a lot of information that we produce in English is our main language. We have some documents translated, and important documents translated to mainly to French, some of them Spanish, some of them Portuguese, but we have a whole lot of language that could use to have that document. And if someone wants to translate, we are a very open committee around that. So please do, and ask us, and I will send you the documents to translate, of course. And we can help as well with our experience in the Portuguese project.
Right, is there anybody in the audience who'd like to volunteer to help us with this?
Translation in what language?
Any language.
Well, Spanish is already done.
Well, a language. Well, for example, German. Looking at Germans in the front row.
First row. Yeah, when we were discussing to what extent and what we need to advance documentation is new standards. So CIDOC works in developing standards to support work and to support interoperability. I mentioned that you've mentioned that these standards are helpful when they're in your own language. And I mentioned the role of universities as sort of carriers of some of these standards. And I'm looking now at the members of the audience who are working on universities, and perhaps CRM is housed in a university. To what extent are these standards presented within the curriculum? Any ideas? I know the basics of principles of documentation should be somewhere presented in universities, but in other programs, are some of these standards communicated regularly? Looking at some of the university staff. Stephen? Yeah, there's a hand. There we go. Stephen?
I'll have more than one mic.
So certainly within my teaching within the Open University, I mention the CIDOC CRM a lot because it's very handy for people to start to understand how knowledge can be organized and ontology engineering can be conducted. Other things, of course, we have the CIDOC Summer School, where we've developed a wide curriculum that is delivered sometimes in universities and other times as summer schools. So we do get a a few opportunities to get that material into the hands of early career professionals, not necessarily youngsters, but just early in their career within documentation. And we've hosted people from a wide number of countries at the summer schools. So we do try and get some of this material out into the hands of people, but finding it into the curriculum in other university courses is more challenging to find that people do or do not use it. Certainly at Southampton, where I teach, it's heavily involved because I'm there. So all the students get beaten to death with CIDOC standards. Every one of them they have to read, otherwise they don't get past me. And you know, I block the door quite efficiently. I'm big. So some places it gets used heavily because there is personal contact between CIDOC and somebody at the institution. I'm not sure that we're very good yet at reaching out to universities in general and making it available in a pedagogic form that enables people to consume it. It's certainly something that we aspire to within the CRM SIG. The archaeology working group, or archaeological sites working group, it's something that we would want to do, but we're still struggling getting the standards ready. And so I think there's a range of work that we could do to make pedagogic material available, but this community is more about producing the material. You know, we want to produce standards, and that's what the thing that excites the community of work here. Getting involved in producing pedagogic material is an extra, and there are a few people who like doing it, but that's not our core business. So we'd welcome people who wanted to engage in that way, probably with all of the working groups.
And given the, thank you for this, and given that the CIDOC community is also so extremely interdisciplinary, I wonder how will that look like? Yes, there's another hand. Christian, Emil? Yes?
It's on. Just about, I think my experience from the second university in Oslo is that, or in general, is that standards like CIDOC CRM or LRM, they are actual for studies in library science and in archival sciences, and not so much in cultural history sciences. And that's a pity, but it tends to be so that teachers in cultural history don't like complex standards because they are interested in culture.
And I would like to just, before we go to the, okay, Zagreb. Yes.
At University of Zagreb, I'm teaching museum documentation at study of museology and heritage management.
Yeah.
So the whole course is organized on standards, you know, but data structure, data value, and data content, and of course some part of the conceptual models.
Yeah, Zagreb is one of the best practice. I wrote a chapter for a book together with Monica on the, among other things, documentation. And we did an analysis on the university programs for museums that had documentation and information science. And indeed, most of the interesting courses are inside library sciences and not heritage. But then in the Domino working group, one of the ideas from the crowd was of doing, what if we propose a sort of body or buddies, or how do you call this?
Buddy.
Where you have, you know, a third year discussing with a first year, or having a CRM expert or one of the other CIDOC standards experts, not necessarily using pedagogical materials, because indeed that requires so much more work, but just with one emerging interested colleague about, you know, I work in a museum, I have this, where do I start? Is this something that we can see potential for within CIDOC?
I think it does. So those of the older persuasion what do you think of the idea of, the other word you could use is mentor, but it may be a bit too formal, but acting as a buddy to a emerging professional? Put your hand up.
Can you ask the question again?
Are you willing to be a buddy to an emerging professional for documentation?
Those experts in the room?
Yeah?
The CRMs already have their hands full.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it's a good concept.
Yeah, Kaia, is this something that takes place already within Estonia through MUIS, that some of the most experienced museums support emerging museums adopting some technologies? Yes? Yes. What does this mentoring mean? So we have a lot of know-how.
Yeah.
For instance, on Spectrum, different members of CIDOC have expertise, for instance, in strategy, for instance, in developing the application of other standards and so on. To what extent some of these experts will be willing to perhaps work on a small little project with one museum interested in applying some of these standards and being available for not teaching, but being available for asking questions or for saying, look, I did it this way, try it. Yes, we have one hand.
And me.
Yes, we have two hands. And yes, I posed the question to Estonia. Kaia, is this something that already happens in Estonia? Is there already some mentoring?
Okay. Trilce, please ask again what you want to ask in Estonia. Yes.
When we're experts multitask, of course. Yeah, the question is, experts hold many years' experience using standards for documentation of collections and know how to advance and do it in the right way. Is there some form of mentoring where experts work with junior and emerging professionals in other institutions, not in your own, but in other institutions, to sort of support this exchange of knowledge? Not only that, because I know many of the staff in Estonia change jobs and go to another museum and take the knowledge with them, but what about senior and knowledgeable staff sharing their knowledge across museums? Does this take place via MUIS, maybe?
Of course, it is very important to share these knowledges all museums, and it is also important that the museum each other change knowledges, museum worker, because in MUIS we started work 2003, and there is most important not the system itself, but the work with people that understand what means documentation in info system. And it's very big work that after 10 years people already work with information system, and this mentation is very important every time, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I know that there's another question in the front row, so maybe we can pass the microphone. And in the meanwhile, I would like to say, well, I think this could be an interesting plan if CIDOC experts could, volunteer, and then, at the headquarters we can gather some of the names, contact information, an area of expertise, and perhaps I'm looking at Prova with ICCROM. I know that you work with training. And you mentioned Object ID. We don't have her with us today, but Lina Nachol is one of the experts in Object ID in Chile, for instance. She could be available in Spanish and English, and there's others who, might be interested to support the application of some of these standards for documentation. And Mika, I see you have a question.
Yeah, a comment. I'm trying to see if Maya is in the room, but I can't detect her. But my impression from the situation is from Finland is that Spectrum is known, used, and adopted, and CIDOC CRM is very much in the margins. I would say that it's hardly known. People will recognize the name, but that's all. So in a way, there is a kind of competition situation between Spectrum and CIDOC CRM, even though if it doesn't come from the inside from the nature of the standards. But my feeling is that CIDOC CRM it's not. I mean, it has not got a foothold in the Finnish institutions.
Well, they're for different reasons, I would say. Yeah? They have different tasks. Gordon, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've sort of said it, but I don't think there is a competition between Spectrum and the CRM.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
So, can you say some sentence about Spectrum? Stephen doesn't have a microphone.
Well, I can have one in a minute if he wants.
Well,
yeah. I mean, as Steve just said, the CRM and Spectrum are not doing the same thing.
Yeah. So the Spectrum is telling you what to record, and the CRM is telling you how to exchange that information with other institutions.
Yeah.
So they're completely different tasks. The majority of Spectrum was mapped into the CRM in 2000.
Yeah.
So they've been closely aligned for over 20 years. So there's no competition between them. Knowledge across different types of institution in different geographies may be very different about it. Spectrum has a very high profile for perfectly good reasons, excellent reasons. It's damn good at what it does. And the CRM's good at what it does, but there are fewer people who want to integrate data between across institutional boundaries, and consequently, it's a rather less well-known beast.
Yes, and so perhaps.
Hold on. Monica wants to say something.
Can I just briefly? In Finland, we have a very high level of integration between institutions, but this integration has not been done using the CRM. And I believe in Estonia, the MUIS probably it's the same situation, that you have a high level of integration, but it has not gone through the CRM. But I mean, CRM will work somewhere else.
And that's perfect. Yes.
I just wanted to clarify that the CRM is widely known.
Yeah.
Seeing what is, when we are asked about it, you have even many people who think that CIDOC and CIDOC CRM is the same thing. Which also is not the case, because there are others as well. But I think this is something which we need to work on to clarify what standards are there and for which they are to be used. And that's one of the works I think we are continuing to do. And so a little bit depending on whom you are talking to, if it's more those who want to connect knowledge, want to bring together different sources, then you quickly come to that they have heard about the CRM and that they are thinking of applying it. It's a different thing if you, like in the case of Estonia, for example, you build one system and you expect everybody to use it. Then you start thinking about that you need to bring together these networks by, let's say, if you want to bring together the museum network and the museum database, the Estonian-wide database, together with a library database or with another database coming from somewhere else. And then you start again thinking about how we can connect these, and then you need these experts again. The other thing is that going back to the institution and to those of us who are working with the content, with the collections, you need to understand how you do it properly. So it's really different task, and I think both are standards which are widely known. Of course, a little bit to different communities. And as Mika says, it might be different in countries. It depends also very much what is promoted in the country by those who are responsible for these type of questions. And I would say we still can do quite a lot better here, and even better if we think about not only museums but heritage institutions altogether. And then it means also that we as CIDOC should have a look what's happening in the other heritage related organizations. And it's again then but clarifying, like Stephen just did, what is for what the good thing to use. Sorry, that's what I just wanted to comment.
Yes, thank you very much. Now this last comment was punctual because you bring together exactly what CIDOC is all about. We have several working groups who focus on a particular standard or a particular area, on exhibitions, on language, on Domino, on different areas, institutions, on Lido, on so on. And so it's a very rich team. We're coming to the close of this conference. And I think what I meant to ask people, what is it that you took away from this conference? And I asked some of you in the lunch pause, and I'll be asking some of you at our closing event. We have a couple of hours break, so you can go home, get some warmer coats, and then join us at 7:30 at the Kalamazoo Museum and Garden. It's a village in the middle of the city. Stories about Kalajama. We have a tour. It's a lovely house that has done a lot of work to work with the community. It's part of it's part of the city museums, and is one of the best examples in Estonia on how documentation happens through the contributions of people. People bring stories, people bring objects, and together they build. It's like a hotspot. Talking about across what other sectors are doing in archives, they call them hotspots, but in different sectors they call them different. So I thank you very much for having joined online and for having joined physically here in this beautiful film museum, in this great high-tech film hall. I look forward to seeing you all in our next CIDOC conference in Mexico City in September. But first, let's enjoy the city of Estonia. Thank you very much.